ABC Friends, and I think I'd like to acknowledge the extraordinary work of Janine Kitson, who has made this one of the most active and flourishing branches of ABC Friends in New South Wales.
Yes.
And I'd also like to acknowledge, if he's here yet, the presence of Matt Cross. There he is, okay. It's great to see you here. We have had far too little conversation with the Liberal Party. We approached the party at the ABC Alumni, that is, a couple of years ago to try and have a chat with Mr. Olsen, who's the national president of the party. And that never quite found the right time. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, but thank you very much for coming, Matt. Janine wrote in one of her flyers for this event that when I spoke in October 2019, and I'm quoting Janine, it was a time of unrelenting budget and programme cuts at the ABC, massive job losses, sagging staff morale, leadership chaos, and hostile commercial rivals. Well, some of those things, particularly the last, is very much still with us. Some of them are a lot better. In fact, they were already getting better in 2019. The direst week that I can almost remember for the ABC was the previous September 2018, when the managing director, Michelle Guthrie, was sacked by the board about 3 years into a 5-year term, and only 2 days later, the chair, Justin Milne, had to resign, or felt it was best to resign, perhaps I should say, because in a kind of revenge attack, Michelle Guthrie revealed that he had been pressuring her to sack two of the ABC's most senior journalists, Emma Alberici and Andrew Perman, to keep the terminal government happy. Now, I've been asked to say just a few words about what the ABC is for the very few people here who might not fully understand it, but it's relevant in recalling those events. The ABC had its foundation really in imitation of the BBC, but it isn't quite the same. In one important respect, it is a publicly owned, taxpayer-funded public broadcaster whose tasks are quite clearly defined in the ABC Act. And the big difference with most other such organisations is that it's funded directly from the government budget. There's not a licence fee, as there is in Britain, for example, which puts some separation between the government and the broadcaster. And so the ABC is always perceived to be vulnerable to government pressure. They are, after all, or the taxpayer is the paymaster, but the government often thinks that that means that it's the paymaster, and of course it is in the sense that it determines how much of the national budget should go to the ABC, and that's been going down and down and down as a percentage of the overall government budget. And the main job, at least in the eyes of many of us, of the chair and board of the ABC is to act as a bulwark, as some kind of wall, if you like, between the government and the broadcaster, to ensure that the ABC remains independent. And what Justin Milne said, fascinatingly, in one of the couple of interviews that he gave between sacking his managing director and resigning himself, I can't remember who the interviewer was, it might have been Alan Fat anyway. They said, but aren't you breaking down the wall between the ABC and the government by asking for people to be sacked because the government's unhappy with them? And he said, I've never thought that my job was to be a wall. I always thought my job was to be a conduit for passing on the government's views. After all, they are the ABC's paymasters. It would be hard to envision how you could get that job more wrong. Now, the immediate aftermath of all that, David Anderson, a very long time ABC person who'd been in the ABC for 35 years or something, started as a postboy in Adelaide or whatever. He was appointed temporary managing director, then permanent managing director, and in one of the few brilliant decisions that Scott Morrison took during his time as PM, he appointed Ita Butler as chair. A captain's pick, she wasn't on anybody's lists, and she wasn't a completely uncontroversial chair within the ABC or outside it. But one thing you have to say for Ita, that she absolutely defended the ABC's independence. And at times she told the government to go and get stuffed, almost in those words. She now, of course, has left, and we now have a new chairman. He prefers to be called chairman or chair. I think he thinks that chairs don't talk or something. Kim Williams. Now, chairs of the ABC are quite quiet. It can be a somewhat powerless job. The managing director tends to be the public figure, the public face of the ABC. But Kim has been unusually vocal and unusually specific in his ambitions, in what he thinks the ABC should be doing and whether he thinks it's doing it well or not. And I thought I'd spend most of this quick talk looking at what he's said and maybe making a few comments of my own on that. Before I do that, the first thing that Kim has said, and he did speeches, for example, the John Monash oration, I think early in September, back in June, he gave the Raymond Barry lecture at the State Library of Victoria. He did a 1-hour interview with Kerry O'Brien at the Bar and Writers Festival, which is fascinating. More recently, he gave a lecture at the Lowy Institute Media Awards. These are all on the record. You can find them all on the ABC website. And they're really wonderful speeches, and I urge you to have a look at them. He's an extraordinarily articulate speech maker, and I suspect he wrote it all himself. I don't think he has a ghostwriter. Because Kim actually is not only a brilliant man, there's no question about it. He's an extraordinarily widely educated man. He started, of course, as a clarinetist and a composer, and he went from there to Music of Viva. He's run, since then, he's been the boss of a large number of media companies, including Foxtel, Fox Studios, and ultimately News Corporation Australia, all of which, of course, are under control by Rupert Murdoch and his son Lachlan, who's often forgotten. But Kim has always had a passion for the ABC. He actually applied to be managing director at the age of 28, and applied a couple of times after that. And it's possible to wonder whether he's going to be content with the more limited job of chair. But at any rate, he's had no hesitation, after a few months of cogitation and consultation, no doubt, of making clear what he thinks the ABC should be doing and how well he thinks it's doing it right now. The first thing that he says in all of these speeches, and in some ways the most important, is that the ABC is one of our crucial bullocks in defence of democracy. He tends to go through the extremely trying and difficult time that mainstream media all over the world, of all kinds, whether commercial or public, have experienced ever since the digital revolution began to really creep up on us in the last decade or so, or really actually the last 20 years. For the commercial media operations, it is truly frightening, mainly because of the flight of advertising away from first classified, which is dead as far as newspapers are concerned, and then all advertising. I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but something approaching 50% of the advertising dollars that are spent by advertising agencies in Australia goes to Google and Facebook. And all of that money is money that used to go directly to the creators of journalism, of film, of television, whatever. So the commercial model, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, of commercial media, where advertisers paid for the programs that we watched, effectively advertisers bought the audience, is dead. Pretty much. No, it's not dead yet. I mean, it is dying and it's in trouble. And what used to be newspapers, of course, now depend far more heavily on subscriptions. They realised that to give away their precious product free online for something like 20 years was a colossal mistake. And they're scrambling to try to correct that. And some of them are managing it, like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, even to some extent, or lesser extent, the Washington Post, have all got huge income now from subscribers all over the world. It's harder for the tabloid newspapers in Australia, for example. It's tough for the Australian, it's tough for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. They have been cutting staff remorselessly for 20 years. The newsroom journalists in Australia, or I should say professional journalists, there used to be about 24,000 of them, and now about 12. It's not as bad for the public broadcasters because we don't depend on advertising. We depend on what the government feels like giving us every year. But the problem that we all share is that our captive audiences that used to only have a limited number of television channels to watch, a limited number of radio stations to listen to, are now swamped with product. And as Kim says, we speak English. And that's actually a major problem if you're trying to make money in the media, because so do the Americans and so do the British. And the amount of product that's coming out of those countries, especially expensive drama, and I'll come to that later, makes it extremely hard for any Australian product content maker, as I should say these days, to make a buck, or just to get an audience. Anyway, the other thing that Kim talks about is the onslaught on the notion of objective truth that has come about as a result, primarily, of the rise of social media. The rise of people like Donald Trump, who simply doesn't seem to share the notion that there is such a thing as objective truth. There's his truth, his version of events, and everybody else's, or at least a lot, no, he's followed by, of course, pretty much half the population of the United States, agree with him. But, you know, he calls the media the enemy of the people. He leapt on the phrase fake news and now applies it to any piece of journalism that he doesn't like. And so it is crucial that we have sources of objective, impartial news that people can trust. It's a diminishing concept. And the ABC has hung on to the trust of more Australians than any other media outlet by quite a long way. 78% in the most recent polls say that they trust or very much trust the ABC. News Corporation tabloids get under 50%, and Facebook gets about 30%. So people kind of know that some outlets are more trustworthy than others. But what Kim emphasises is that it is his job and his board's job, and this is absolutely true, it's in the Act. It is their responsibility to ensure that the ABC's factual output is impartial and accurate according to the recognised standards of objective journalism. I'm quoting from the Act. One slight problem with that is that when it was written in 1983, what the Act meant is the ABC's got to be as objective and impartial as all the other journalists are. Well, actually, to survive, commercial media has discovered that it can't afford to be too objective. What sells, what people want to read far too often these days is opinion. The more contrary the opinion, the better. And you need to have a kind of collective audience that basically all thinks the same thing. News Corp, particularly Sky News, particularly the Australian, know what the general opinions of the people who have subscribed to them or listened to them or watched them are, and they play to it. That isn't the same as objective journalism, although no doubt they would rebut that. Let me just quote one line from one of Kim's speeches. The battle between democracy and populism is often a contest between the truth and lies, because where there is no truth, there is no democracy. Truth is the oil that makes the machinery of freedom work. That is so true, and it's so important, and it's great to have a chair of the ABC who's saying it out loud. However, the ABC is not currently doing the job to the chairman's satisfaction. Far from it. In his Redmond Barry lecture last June, he spelled out what the ABC should be doing and should be doing better, in his view, than it is now. And he made that even plainer in his interview with Kerry O'Brien, where he spelled out with unusual frankness his assessment of how well the ABC is doing. He had 8 priorities, and I'm going to quickly run through all of them, because they're all important. Number 1, objective reporting and thoughtful analysis. I've talked about that already, but suffice it to say that in Kim Williams' view, the present output of the ABC's news and current affairs is too bland, with too much filler, and too much of a tabloid sensibility. In his private talk, as he thought to Radio National, there was of course probably leaks to the Sydney Morning Herald, as these things are. He had a go at the news priorities that you see on the ABC News app, where huge international events came well down the list after what you might call lifestyle items. And look, there's a lot that could be said about that, but most of us, I think, would applaud the sentiment that King's uttering there. He wants a renewed Radio National. He compares it, I think somewhat unfairly, but never mind, with the BBC's Radio 4, which has a share of the listening audience in Britain of 17%. Radio National has a share of 1.5%. But it is the only national network in the country, the only place where you can hear the same thing in Perth as you can in Sydney, albeit 2 hours or 3 hours later in Perth. He said to Kerry O'Brien, Radio National is not touching the hearts and minds of the Australian people. Well, that's got to be true, only 1.5% are listening to it. My own view on that is that Britain has got national newspapers. Britain is a much smaller, more compact, less regional nation than Australia, even though it's got 3 times the population. National media work in Britain, and it also the BBC has a far more dominant position in radio than the ABC does here. It was started earlier. Commercial radio is still pretty insignificant in Britain. Overwhelmingly, the BBC is what you listen to on the radio. And Radio 4 is a mixture between what Radio National does here, which is kind of highbrow mostly. It's certainly appealing to niche audiences, and the metropolitan radio stations, Sydney and Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane, wherever, which don't get all that big a percentage of the listening public either, but they do a lot better than Radio National. It's worth bearing in mind that the top rated radio station in Sydney is Kyle and Jackie O and their salacious kind of nudge, wink, wink, sexual. It's an extraordinary, but I don't know, I've never wasted time listening to it, but it's very different from Radio National. And I think it's a considerable feather in Melbourne's cap that Kyle and Jackie O are in the process of flopping badly. They've always thought of themselves as a superior intellect to Sydney. Anyway, Kim reckons that he hates the term RN, by the way. He reckons that Radio National should be the national campfire, as he puts it. Somewhere where everyone can come together and listen and learn and share and be amused and not break into violent argument. It's a lovely idea. Let's move on from there. He wants serious TV documentaries. Currently, he told Kerry, ABC documentaries are in a bad place and need restoration. I'm going to come back to that because some of his ideas seem to be quite bizarre, but anyway. He wants expanded drama and comedy. Currently, he told Kerry, they're less distinctive than they should be, that scripted product has lost its way, lost its focus and its way. Well, again, I'll come back to that, but The Newsreader, Utopia, Mystery Road, I reckon these are pretty classy productions.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's a little bit concerning that the chair would be saying publicly that he thinks, ABC drama's, well, he didn't say rubbish, but not good enough. But there are enormous problems with the ABC doing drama, which I'm going to come to. He's one of the few areas that he professes admiration for at the moment is children's television, ABC's children's television. But as he points out, there's very little of it. And we are swamped with American and British children's products, some of it of far less value, let me put it that way, than what the ABC puts out, and all of it in American and British accents with American and British sensibilities. And Kim says, if our children are going to retain their Australianness, especially when so many of them have parents who weren't born here and maybe don't speak particularly good English, and are learning about the culture at the same time as they're learning about their parents' culture and the countries they came from, it is crucial that they have Australian stuff to watch and enjoy. Again, who could argue with that? Number 7 on Kim's list, iView. The ABC, its catch-up online, on-demand product device was a breakthrough at the time. First major network to do it, but it's a bit. It hasn't had the money spent on it to keep up with the Netflixes and all the other on-demand devices that we have. It's actually quite frustrating trying to find the program that you want to find on iView. Many of us find he wants that to be as slick and as good as Netflix or whatever. One of the problems, of course, is one of the ways that Netflix provides you with what you want is you have to register in order to get access to it because you've got to pay, and then it can track what you watch and what you don't watch. Now, for ages, the ABC didn't do that. Anyone could watch iView. You didn't have to register in any way. As a result, it didn't know who was watching, and it couldn't recommend stuff that it thought you would enjoy, which left it behind all its rivals. When it did ask for people to register, there was a bit of an outcry. Oh, invasion of privacy. How dare the ABC require that we register to watch it? So our ABC. Well, as a result, iView is much less satisfying for customers or clients, or in this case citizens, than it should be. He wants to fix that. And the last thing he talks about a lot is ABC International and our outreach to, especially to our own region. And again, it's an area where he thinks the ABC, thanks to an injection of funds, it should be said, by the Albanese government in 2022, is doing a pretty good job, not only in broadcasting or sending screen product to those countries in various ways, but also in training and just spreading skills, especially in the Pacific, to the indigenous journalists and media. It's a really crucial function. Now, most of us, I think, would say, well, that's a terrific list, but Kim's only one bloke, and he has specific tastes, which is why it's always unwise to have one person determining everything about the ABC. For example, Kim has said many times that he would love to see a series of documentaries that tell Australians how Australia works. A documentary about the High Court, a documentary about the Reserve Bank, a documentary about the Australian Electoral Commission, a documentary about the committee system in the Senate. And my instinct as a former head of ABC documentaries is to to say, Kim, great, for if we had a further education channel, and this was a part of our outreach. But mainstream television, you can make the programs, but how do you get people to watch? Well, you might say, we have done some documentaries that are getting near to that. The famous series that started with Labour and Power back in the late 1990s, and then there was a series about the John Howard years, and then there was a series called The Killing Fields about Labour's cutthroat abolition of 3 prime ministers, whatever it was, and then the latest one, Nemesis, which did extraordinarily well. I mean, a lot of people watched it. And Kim could say, well, there you go. People do want this stuff. But you see, Nemesis, and indeed all of those others, were riveting stories of rivalry and ambition and frustration. They were human stories told by people who didn't care very much anymore because most of them had left politics. And that's what made them riveting viewing. You go to the Australian Electoral Commission and say, well, we want to do a riveting story about that. So I reckon it'd be tough. It'd be tough to make them, very tough to get the permission of the people, the guardians of all those institutions to let cameras in the first place, and tougher still to make the Australians want to watch them in any numbers. Those decisions will be taken ultimately, or at least the implementation, by the new managing director, whoever he or she may be, and the management of the ABC. And no doubt there will be fierce arguments at times with the chair and the board, and they might be saying, well, look, that's really a bit of a screwy idea, to be honest, chair. And that's all good and healthy. But the big and overwhelming problem, oh my gosh, I'm over time already, very quick. The big and overwhelming problem is money. The ABC got a little bit of an injection of funds from the Albanese government in 2022. And when I say little, I mean little. The Labour government successfully managed to persuade people that they fixed the ABC. They gave it $22 million extra per year to compensate for the money that was lost by the indexation freeze for 3 years under the Morrison government. But that was just the money that particular freeze for those particular 3 years cost the ABC. And that $83 million is being re-injected, and it will stop at the end of next year. Not only that, but because of that freeze, the ABC's budget in 2022 was about $40 million less than it would have been if there hadn't been a freeze from 2019. And that $40 million has just gone a year, not just, because, yes, indexation was restored, but it was restored at the level that it was in 2022, not at the level where it would have been if there hadn't been indexation freeze already. It's a complicated argument, but the bottom line is that unless this government or the following government does something about it, the ABC's budget will actually drop in 2026-27 by well over $40 million. That's a lot of money. Let me give you an idea of what sort of money we're talking about. My son is a production designer in feature films, what he does for a living. And he recently designed a 8-part, if any of you watched it, but this was a series set in New York City, written by a British screenwriter, produced by a British production company, shot almost entirely in Budapest in Hungary, because it's a lot cheaper, but paid for by American dollars by Netflix. And it did very well for a short period, as these things do, and I expect Netflix was reasonably happy with it. Now, the budget for that 8-part series was £7 million per episode. $11 million, or for 8 episodes, $96 million. The ABC's budget for making all programming except news and current affairs, so not only television but all of radio, drama, comedy, quiz shows, the lot, is about $300 million a year. So a big chunk goes to news and current affairs, and a reasonable chunk goes to administration and all the other things that it's just to do. So Netflix on one 8-hour series spent 1/3 of the money that the ABC has to make all of its programs all year, with the exception of news and current affairs. How does the ABC, and the ABC doesn't make its own drama or documentary or pay for it all. It's all done by independent producers, and one of the reasons for that is that they get money from Screen Australia and they get money from investors, and in order to repay those investors, they have to sell overseas. All the ABC gets, he puts in about 1/3 of the budget, and it gets the Australian rights for a limited number of years to show on iView or whatever. So, how do you compete, never mind for viewers, how do you compete for the independent producers coming to you when they can go to Netflix and get the entire budget paid for back? No worries. They don't have to get any further return. They don't have to go hassling around looking for investors. And even when the Albanese government does what it's been promising to do and says that they have to spend a percentage of their takings, all of these streamers, the international streamers, the Disneys and Netflixes and so on, and Stan, if they put a quota, say 20% of the revenue you get from Australia has to be spent on Australian production, which is the independent producers love the idea, where does that leave? That will gobble up even more of the production capacity and making programs even more expensive in Australia. Now, I mean, in one way, ABC Alumni supports that idea. In another way, we're kind of worried. And actually, one of our members of our board, Chandra Levy, who was director of television at ABC and head of drama before that, and the producer, among many other things, of Brides of Christ, which Kim quotes as an example of what the ABC should be doing in drama, started saying, I actually think we should seriously consider that the ABC gives up doing drama altogether, because we can't afford it. The money could be used to boost other things, and now it's a controversial notion, and Chris Oliver Taylor, who's the head of non-news current affairs content at the ABC, is a drama guy, and he absolutely passionately believes that the ABC should continue to do drama. But this is the problem. So what we need is more money, and of course the government obviously doesn't want to hear that. They hear it from everybody else in the country. Oh, it's just a little bit, what's $100 million compared with the submarines? That's what everybody says to the Treasurer. But I think, and Kim thinks, that that's about the minimum extra that we need to be in a fighting place. And whether he'll get it, I don't know. And the last thing I will say is that Kim has put his feet where his mouth is, if I can put it that way. He's been prowling the corridors of Parliament House. He's been seeing cabinet ministers, junior cabinet ministers, secretaries of departments with an intensity that no chair before him, unless you go back as far as David Hill, and he was only chair for a few months and then became managing director. He's really pushing for more money. But as he says, he thinks he can stabilise the budget and avoid that $40 million cliff. But he has not. He's not making any promises about getting any more. So it's really important that, friends, you keep pushing that. Now, I haven't talked at all about some of the things that you might want to know about the rivalry, if you like, between television and radio, which are obsolescent technologies, and all the other ways that people access ABC content and all the other content that they are happy to talk about that if there's any questions about them. But I'm well over time, so I'm going to shut up now. But let me just say, for all my doubts about some of the things Kim's saying, it is fabulous to have somebody who's out there kicking and pulling and making a noise, and good luck to him.